Today, we're diving into Brittany Eldridge's really powerful memoir, Healing the Light Within Me. It's this raw, personal story about untangling a super painful past to figure out a debilitating present. And, the key to her recovery? It was in a place she never thought to look, inside herself. So let's get into her story.
The author kicks things off with this quote, and honestly, it becomes the main idea for her entire journey. It completely reframes her struggle, right? The goal isn't just to make the pain stop, but to actually understand what the pain is pointing to. For her, every single trigger was like a clue, leading her back to some deeper, unhealed wound.
Brittany starts her story with this amazing metaphor. She said she felt like a car that had its check engine light on all the time. She just knew something was fundamentally broken, but every single doctor, every therapist she saw, they only seemed to focus on the symptoms, not the real root cause. And this led to years and years of frustration and just a whole collection of diagnostic labels.
And wow, what a list it was. After visiting 10 different mental health professionals, she was carrying the weight of all these diagnoses. And yeah, one therapist told her that these are just human labels for behaviors. But for Brittany, they felt like this huge, overwhelming burden that didn't give her any clear way to actually get better.
So what did these labels actually mean for her day-to-day? Let's start with borderline personality disorder. The book connects this directly to her childhood trauma. It wasn't just some clinical term. It was this intense emotional roller coaster, a constantly shifting sense of who she was, and this deep, deep fear of being abandoned that basically defined her entire existence. Her obsessive-compulsive disorder was also a world away from the stereotype of just being really neat. It was a debilitating condition. She talks about these constant checking rituals, a fear of germs that was so extreme she'd wash every single item from the grocery store, and this terrifying existential dread that made her question reality itself. These weren't just quirks, they were prisons.
Okay, so to find the source of all this pain, she had to start unraveling this giant, tangled ball of yarn that was her past. And the very first thread she decided to pull on? It was this foundational wound left by her father's abandonment.
This quote from her memoir just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It shows how, before she ever even had a chance to figure out romantic relationships, this fundamental feeling of rejection and not being good enough was already buried deep inside her. In this timeline, it shows you exactly how that wound was formed, piece by painful piece. At just 6 years old, she was asked by the police to choose between her parents. A little later, she was suddenly not allowed at her dad's house anymore, and as a kid, of course, she thought it was all her fault. It wasn't just one thing, it was this constant absence for 14 of her most important formative years.
So, while she's trying to deal with the gaping hole left by her father, her home, the one place that's supposed to be her sanctuary, was also being violently torn apart. This next layer of trauma came when her stepfather arrived, a man she calls simply the monster.
The book goes into these really specific, chilling memories that just shattered her sense of safety. A fist punching the car windshield right next to her head. A plate thrown so hard at her mom that it got stuck in the wall. These weren't just flashes of anger. They were terrifying events that completely rewired her brain and turned her own home into a place of constant, terrifying fear.
So here's the really crucial point. Understanding how these events from her past didn't just stay in the past. They created echoes that shaped her behaviors, her fears, and her compulsions as an adult in these very direct and painful ways.
Look at this. You can draw a straight line from a childhood wound to an adult echo. As a little girl, locking herself in the bathroom was a survival tactic, a way to escape abuse. So as an adult, that instinct was so deeply ingrained that the bathroom was still her only truly safe space, a place she'd retreat to, sometimes even sleeping on the floor, because her own home just felt too threatening. The book uses this amazing poem by Portia Nelson to show the slow, frustrating, and very real journey of recovery. You can see it here. It starts with falling in a hole and feeling like a victim. Then you start to become aware of it. Then you take responsibility. Then you learn to avoid it. And finally, you just choose a completely new path. It really shows that healing isn't some instant fix. It's a gradual process of learning.
So after all the therapy, all the diagnoses, all the painful memories, Brittany finally got to the very center of that tangled ball of yarn. And this was the discovery that would completely reframe her entire approach to healing. So, what was it? What was this big discovery? What was the key that all the diagnoses and therapies had somehow missed? Well,
After years of looking for some external solution, she realized the answer wasn't outside of her at all.
This was it. This was the core realization. All the constant pain, the emptiness, the instability, it was all the desperate cry of her damaged inner child. The little girl who felt abandoned and terrified had been buried for years, and her unhealed wounds were the real reason that check engine light was always on.
The first step toward healing that little girl was just to acknowledge her. She wrote this letter, a simple but really profound act of self-compassion. For the very first time, instead of trying to fix her adult self, she was turning inward to take care of the wounded child who just needed love, validation, and safety.
And that brings us to the final, powerful question the book leaves us with. And it's a question not just for the author, but for every single one of us. It reframes self-care not as some kind of indulgence, but as this vital act of reparenting, of giving ourselves the love, protection, and nurturing that maybe, just maybe, we never received.